Okay, why is the annulus basically important? When your annulus contracts or constricts, the annulus basically the structure which holds your mitral valve cusps or the leaflets. When it tries to contract, it will produce something what is called as a coaptation zone. This is very important. To talk about mitral stenosis and mitral regurgitation in detail for hours together is very easy. But to not talk about coaptation zone and to talk about mitral regurgitation is meaningless. So, what is this coaptation zone? When the annulus is going to contract, the valves are going to come closer to each other, and that is going to close your entry of blood from the left atrium to the left ventricle, or vice versa. So, this zone is what is called as the coaptation zone. When you have an annular dilatation, when you have what is called an annular dilatation, your coaptation zone is going to be abnormal or it is not formed properly. So when the coaptation zone is not formed properly, you will find blood regurgitating back into your left atrium. Okay, so it is very simple. I put the very complex anatomy of the mitral valve in very simpler terms. Okay, so you have got what is called as the papillary muscles, anterolateral and the posteromedial, 25 primary chordae tendineae attaching to the tip of the leaflet. Secondary and tertiary chordae tendineae have got two leaflets. I told you the anterior leaflet is a thicker and a larger one, and the posterior leaflet is a thinner and a smaller one. Okay, and the posterior leaflet is more prone for prolapse. Okay, mitral, when you talk about mitral valve prolapse as the most common cause of mitral regurgitation, we always mean the posterior valve of leaflet of the mitral valve is going to prolapse initially. Okay, then you have got two commissures. Commissures are basically where the points, both the leaflets are going to attach themselves to the mitral annulus. Okay, so that is all about the anatomy, like an overview, a bird's eye view of the anatomy. Now we'll talk in detail about the very common, the very famous mitral stenosis. Have you all heard the term mitral stenosis before, or have you all seen any patient of mitral stenosis before? I really want to know. I'm not trying to like what I my approach or my explanation would differ if you had all been acquainted with the case or if you have not been acquainted with the case. I'm really asking out of my ignorance whether you all know about mitral stenosis, whether you have seen a patient with mitral stenosis, or if you have heard a murmur of mitral stenosis before. Yes or no?
No, sir.
Okay, fine then. Nothing to worry. You can all come back. I heard you're all coming back in a very short period of time. You can all come back. We have ample number of cases of mitral stenosis in our wards. Aortic stenosis, regurgitation. We at least have one or two patients in each of our 6 to 7 medical wards, and during every admission day, we get at least 2 to 3 cases of valvular heart diseases. So that will not be a problem. Okay. So what is mitral stenosis? Stenosis, the term, it is basic English vocabulary. You have the left atrium, left ventricle. You have a valve size that is becomes stenosed. Okay, the amount of blood that is entering from your left atrium to the left ventricle is decreased because of a decrease in the valve size. That is what it literally translates to. But it is not as simple as how it explains. Okay, we look at mitral stenosis from the causes. The most common cause of mitral stenosis is rheumatic heart disease. Okay, there is a lot of difference between rheumatic heart disease and an acute rheumatic fever. In which subject will you read about acute rheumatic fever? In which subject of your MBBS curriculum will read about acute rheumatic fever? Or have you read about acute rheumatic fever? Will you read it in medicine? I don't think so. I have not read it in medicine. Do I have an answer or should I tell the answer? At least answer for that.
So microbiology, sir.
Okay. A very astute student would say I've read it in microbiology, but I didn't mean to ask if you read it in microbiology or pathology, and and then another astute student might tell I read the treatment in pharmacology. That is fine. In all your preclinical subjects you read, which clinical subject do you think you'll read acute rheumatic fever?
Pediatrics, sir.
Very good. That is what I wanted to tell you all. Acute rheumatic fever is a pediatric illness. Okay. So, rheumatic heart disease, whereas is a medicine subject. Okay, it is a medicine topic. So, when approximate age of acute rheumatic fever is going to be 10 to 15 years, which we will be talking about in your pediatrics class. But rheumatic heart disease, the patient will come to you after a period of 2 decades. So, the interval between an untreated acute rheumatic fever to transform into a proper rheumatic heart disease would be around 2 decades. That is 20 years it will take. So the average age that you see patients with mitral stenosis is around 30 to 35 years, and it is got a female predominance, as you all know. Okay. And moreover, the rheumatic heart disease most commonly, it is the topic is still debatable. It has got a lot of dilemma till today. What is the most common valvular lesion that you see in a rheumatic heart disease? Most of the people say just by observation as mitral regurgitation. But as far as we've seen in an Indian setup, and as far as I've seen to my knowledge and what my teachers have taught me, it is mitral stenosis, because 100% of mitral stenosis are associated with rheumatic heart disease. But the most common lesion in rheumatic heart disease could be mitral regurgitation. Okay, it is not the other way around. The other way around does not hold good as far as mitral stenosis and rheumatic heart disease are concerned. Okay, so the most common cause of mitral stenosis, just because I don't want to confuse you all, is rheumatic heart disease, and 40 to 45% of the rheumatic heart disease have got a mitral stenosis predominant lesion along with an MR. Only 25% of the rheumatic heart disease have got pure MS. This is European Heart Society statistics. Okay, so let that be as their statistics, and we're not bothered about statistics anymore. So if you're not going to intervene a patient with, or if you're not going to treat a patient with mitral stenosis with an underlying rheumatic heart disease, due to an underlying rheumatic heart disease, the patient will hardly live for only 2 to 5 years. Okay, so that it is so very important. But if we can treat him, he'll survive for a longer period of time. So his longevity for an untreated rheumatic heart disease with the mitral stenosis is just 2 to 5 years. So other causes, I usually don't want people to look for other causes of rheumatic heart disease, or at least for an undergraduate exam. I don't think people will expect you to answer for other causes of mitral stenosis other than rheumatic heart disease. Okay, so if at all you say infective endocarditis, if at all you say LA myxoma, or if you are very shrewd enough to answer a congenital parachute mitral valve as a cause of your mitral stenosis case in your final exam, I think your discussion will go to your postgraduate level, and be very prepared to comment as these as the underlying cause of your mitral stenosis, unless the examiner wants to probe on the other causes of mitral stenosis. Okay, so what basically happens here? The valve is going to thicken. Thickening of the valve is going to produce a deformed chordae, and commissure is going to fuse. See, chordae are the strands that connect the papillary muscle to the leaflet. They are going to become deformed. The commissure is going to fuse, and this will cause shortening of your commissures, which will ultimately cause your valve to become immobile. The leaflets will become immobile because your commissures have shortened and fused with each other. So basic pathological point of view will be calcification of the valve as far as rheumatic heart disease is concerned. So basically, calcification is going to cause deformed chordae, commissural fusion and shortening, and leading to an immobile valve leaflet. So if the valve is going to be immobile, blood is going to become stagnant in your left atrium. So this will lead to what is called as a thrombosis or clot inside your LA. So LA clot is a very common complication that you expect in mitral stenosis. And this can even embolize to your brain and lead to what is called as an embolic stroke or an infarct. Okay, ischemic stroke. Okay. So this is how the basic pathogenesis operates as far as MS is concerned. So the most common site of thrombosis inside your LA would be your LA appendage. And please remember, your LA appendage is seen only with the help of a transesophageal echocardiography, and and not with your routine transthoracic echocardiography that you do it with your what USG probe. Okay, so pathologically speaking, calcification will lead to what is called as the fish mouth appearance of the valve. Okay, nothing much to understand here. Okay, so how do you classify or grade the severity of MS? You have what is called as the 51 rule. It is given in your Harrison as well. You have to see your systemic pulmonary artery pressure, valvular surface area. Okay, so if you look at it, if your pulmonary artery pressure is less than 30 and your valvular surface area is more than 1.5, you call it as a mild MS. If your pulmonary artery pressure is around 30 to 50 and your valve area is less than 1.5 centimeter square, that is around 1 to 1.5 centimeter square, then you call it moderate MS. If you have a pulmonary artery pressure of more than 50 and your valve area is less than 1, it is called severe MS. Why do you have an increase in your pulmonary artery pressure in MS? Because there is going to be increase in your LA pressure, and increase in LA pressure means you have pulmonary hypertension, and pulmonary hypertension is best measured with the help of a pulmonary artery pressure. Okay. Do you have pulmonary hypertension in your Robbins? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
What is the definition, doctor, for pulmonary hypertension? Like what all do you see? PCWP. What is PCWP?
Pulmonary capillary wedge pressure.
Okay. How much should that be in case of pulmonary hypertension? How much should your mean pulmonary artery pressure should be? How much should your pulmonary vascular resistance be?
The normal pressure is around 12 to 15.
12 to
15, sir. I'm not.
in 12 to 15 or your capillary wedge pressure or your
Yes,
pulmonary
sir. I'm not sure, sir.
not sure.
Capillary wedge pressure, sir.
Okay, fine. See, your mean pulmonary artery pressure should be more than how much? Your mean pulmonary artery pressure should be more than at least 15 mm of Hg. Your pulmonary capillary pressure should be less than 25, and your pulmonary vascular resistance should be more than 3 Woods unit. Do you have this in your Robbins or not? I'm very sure.
So
Yeah.
only wedge pressure and pulmonary artery pressure we have, sir.
Okay, but still you can consider your pulmonary vascular resistance as well. Okay, so your pulmonary artery pressure more than 15 and pulmonary capillary wedge pressure less than 25 and pulmonary vascular resistance of more than 3 Woods unit translates to pulmonary hypertension. Okay, so in mitral stenosis you will have increase in your LA pressure, and the increase in LA pressure means increase in your pulmonary circulatory pressure. Okay, which means pulmonary hypertension. So basically, we can classify. We are classifying it based on the pulmonary artery pressure and your valve surface area to understand the pathogenesis. The pathogenesis of severe MS is totally different from that of moderate MS, and it is nowhere near to that of mild MS. Okay. So what is the basic pathophysiology? Basic pathophysiology is that, and in your mild MS, when the patient is at rest, is not going to have any increase in LA pressure. Okay, LA pressure is normal. Your pulmonary artery pressure is again normal. Okay, so but when the patient exerts himself, there's going to be an increase in heart rate. Increase in heart rate means a shorter PR interval, and the shorter PR interval means a decrease in the diastolic PR interval. Talking about the ECG, a decrease in your diastolic time, and decrease in your diastolic time means increase in your LA pressure. That is within a short span of time, your LA, the atrial systole is a component of your diastole. In the cardiac cycle, you've got three components: 0.3 seconds of the systole and 5 components and 0.5 seconds of the diastole, which amounts to 0.8 seconds and 8 events in your cardiac cycle. Okay, so the most important event that we are talking about here is the atrial systole, which is a part of the final part of your diastole, after which your AV valves are going to close, and then your isovolumetric contraction is going to happen as a part of your ventricular systole. So when your diastolic time is going to decrease from less than 0.8 seconds, remember systole is not going to being compensated when your heart rate is going to increase. Only your diastole is going to be compromised when your heart rate is going to increase. So when your diastole is going to be compromised, the time for LA to contract, that is your atrial systole, is going to decrease. So when your time is going to decrease, the atrium has to contract with more severity, more vigor, and that is why it causes an increase in the LA pressure. And an increase in LA pressure means increased pulmonary hypertension, and the cardinal feature of pulmonary hypertension would be exertional dyspnea. And that is why when you exert, you get dyspnea. So the first and foremost sign of mild MS or mitral stenosis itself would be exertional dyspnea. What is the first and foremost sign of aortic stenosis? It is angina. What is the first and foremost sign of aortic regurgitation? It is palpitations. So likewise, the first and foremost sign of MS would be exertional dyspnea. So as far as moderate MS is concerned, okay, moderate MS is concerned, at rest you will have your LV filling will be adequate. That is, even though your valve is stenosis, the amount of blood that is going to come will be adequate. Coming into your LV will be adequate. This is because your LA is compensating for that. For it. So your LA pressure will increase. Increase in LA pressure means two things as far as symptomatology is concerned. One is orthopnea and other is PND. PND has got another five beautiful mechanisms which we'll talk about in the next class when we talk about um, mitral regurgitation. Okay, so paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea and orthopnea. Basically, orthopnea is the patient cannot lie down cannot lie down flat at all. Okay, PND is he can lie down flat for some time, and once all his blood gets gorged from his systemic venous returned into his pulmonary capillaries after some time, he'll get to wake up in the middle of the night. Okay, so that is how typically it is going to be in case of paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. But in both the cases, I told you LV filling pressure is adequate. I mean, LV filling is adequate. The amount of blood inside your LV is adequate. So your cardiac output is normal. So when your cardiac output is going to be normal, there are going to be compensatory mechanisms which you can make out in case of a moderate MS. The first compensatory mechanism is increase in the LA pressure, and as I told you, increase in LA pressure means increase in your pulmonary artery pressure as well. Okay, so pulmonary artery pressure, if that is going to increase, when you have systemic hypertension, what is the compensatory mechanism that you will see in your heart? When you have systemic hypertension, what is the compensatory mechanism that your heart undergoes? Am I talking alone or are you all with me?
Sir, hypertrophy, sir, left ventricle.
Hyper what of the left ventricle?
Hypertrophy.
Very good. Hypertrophy of the left ventricle. So similarly, when in case of pulmonary hypertension, you will have right ventricular hypertrophy. So when your right ventricle is going to be hypertrophied, you will have something what is called as a tricuspid regurgitation. Same mechanism. When your ventricle is going to enlarge, hypertrophy actually does not mean dilatation. Dilatation is totally different from that of hypertrophy. When your heart is concerned, but in your right heart, you can have right ventricular hypertrophy as well as an annulus dilatation of the atrial ventricular valve, and you can have something what is called as a tricuspid regurgitation. So this tricuspid regurgitation is a finding of is an associated finding of a moderate MS. So what are the features of pulmonary hypertension? You can have a loud P2, you can have a palpable P2, or you can have a parasternal heave. I mean parasternal heave. Parasternal heave is an inspection finding. Okay, an inspectory finding which you see at the patient, and if his right heart is going to be hypertrophied, it is going to push your sternum or nearby your sternum. It is going to come out with every single heartbeat. Okay, so that is what is basically parasternal heave. And what is loud P2? When do you say loud? It is loud P2, or how do you say the patient has got a loud P2? Can you just go and say patient has got a loud P2? I've auscultated the nearby patient next to him. I heard his second heart sound S2. It has got a normal split. A2 followed by P2 with a hangout interval of around 30 milliseconds. His P2 was around 30 decibels, but his P2 is around 40 decibels. So he's got a loud P2. How do you say the patient has got a loud P2? By comparing it with the normal person, or do you have it all registered in your mind? Or even do the cardiologists have it registered in the mind? This is the normal decibels of a normal P2. You are going to say a loud P2 just by auscultating. How are you going to compare it, or with which are you going to compare it? So to say that it is a loud P2, or better put, in other words, I will say, what are the features of a loud P2? See, basically, P2 is heard only in your pulmonary region. Where is your pulmonary region basically? Where is your pulmonary area of auscultation? Oh my God. Your pulmonary area is present in your upper left sternal border, in your second intercostal space. Okay, not in your right. Remember, it is your left. Second right intercostal space parallel next to your sternum or in your sternal border is your aortic area of auscultation. Okay, so when you auscultate in your pulmonary area, that is your parasternal border, second intercostal space. This is your, if you hear a P2, it is normal. If you are hearing it P2 in your aortic area, if you are hearing your P2 in the apex of the heart, you are hearing a P2 in your left lower sternal border, LLSB, or the tricuspid area, then you can call the P2 louder. Okay, you can call the P2 louder if it is palpable. You can call the P2 louder if it is palpable or if it is heard in other areas apart from the pulmonary area. Okay, so and you compare it with the A2. Okay, if the interval is short and if the aortic sound is if the second sound of the A2 of the S2 is louder, then you can call it the P2, loud P2. Okay, so in your JVP, you can have, if you have a TR in your JVP, what will be there? The V wave is going to be more prominent. Okay, you have ACE waves, right? AC X descent, V wave, and the Y descent. So this is basically your JVP: AC X descent, V wave, and the Y descent. So your V wave can be prominent in case of a tricuspid regurgitation. V wave is basically due to right ventricular filling. Okay, so um, in your JVP, we'll talk about that in the JVP class. So you can have features of right heart failure. What are the features of right heart failure? You can have pedal edema, then ascites, tender hepatomegaly, and raise JVP. And in the JVP, if you got tricuspid regurgitation, you can have a increase prominent V wave, which is due to basically right atrial filling. Oh, I just mentioned right ventricle. No, V wave is for filling, right atrial filling. When blood comes into your right atrium, the wave is going to be prominent. That is, it causes a positive deflection in your jugular vein. So internal jugular vein. So that is why V wave, V stands for filling. Okay, so when your blood is going to come in tricuspid regurgitation, already there is going to be blood in your right atrium because of the regurgitated amount of blood. When in your another cardiac cycle, in the next heartbeat, if your systemic venous return is going to bring more amount of blood, the already present amount of blood and the additional amount of blood that is being brought in the subsequent cardiac cycle will manifest as a large or a prominent V wave in your JVP. So that is basically why you have a prominent V wave in your tricuspid regurgitation. Okay, so in case of severe MS, now we'll talk about severe MS, which is what we see in your wards. You don't admit the patient unless and until he's got severe MS. For moderate MS, medical management is more than enough. Only for severe MS, we go and look in for surgical management, and we try to do what is called, we try to treat him vigorously. Okay, like give him support, ventilator support, or treat his pulmonary edema, or give him IV diuretics and all. Okay. So he's got a severe increase in his LA pressure. Well, increase in LA pressure again means I don't have to repeat increase in your pulmonary artery pressure. An increase in, though these two rise in these conditions, the cardiac output is going to be decreased. Okay, So decrease in cardiac output has got a number of manifestations. One is the most important clinical picture that you can pick up is a narrowed pulse pressure. Okay. A narrowed pulse pressure is a cardinal feature of decrease in your cardiac output. Okay, in your clinical examination. History-wise, you can say the patient is fatigued, cachexia, he's got a prerenal AK, acute kidney injury picture, all that is there. Okay. So yeah. Um, yeah. So what are the complications that you can see in your mitral stenosis? Okay, this is about the classification of mitral stenosis. Mild MS, you won't have anything except for exertional dyspnea. In moderate MS, you can have features of pulmonary hypertension and right ventricular failure. In severe MS, you will have decreased cardiac output along with features of that of moderate MS, plus or minus. Okay. Excuse me. Hello. Hello. Staff, na duty la Priyanka member duty. What are the complications of MS? Atrial fibrillation. You can have an atrial fibrillation basically because increase in LA pressure can cause remodeling in your left atrium, and this remodeling can give rise to a number of ectopic sites of production of um, uh, what electrical impulses, which you can have in the form of atrial fibrillation. Almost always, all patients either they have a persistent atrial fibrillation or at least a paroxysmal event of atrial fibrillation that usually don't pick up with the help of a random ECG. Okay, so this atrial fibrillation can lead to what is called as an embolic stroke. Pulmonary hypertension means more amount of blood flow in your pulmonary circulation. So the patient can have recurrent bronchitis episodes. Increase in blood means it is very happy, or it is all your bacteria become very happy, and you typically have pneumococcal infections because of the increased amount of blood that gets stagnated in your pulmonary circulation. And very similar. The reason for hemoptysis is also the same because of your stagnant increased blood in your pulmonary circulation that can seep or break through your alveoli and present and manifest as hemoptysis. You can have what is called as the Ortner syndrome. Ortner syndrome is basically due to compression of your left recurrent laryngeal nerve. As far as my anatomy knowledge is concerned, the left recurrent laryngeal nerve comes down to take a loop around your aortic arch and then goes back and supplies your muscles of the larynx. So when it comes down, your left atrium, if it is going to be enlarged, it can compress your left recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, and there's something called as mitral phases. That is, you will have a typical pink purple blushed faces that is mainly seen in your severe MS. So these are the features of or complications of mitral stenosis. And what are the clinical findings that you will see? One is the pulse. Pulse can be normal. You can have a decreased pulse pressure in case of severe MS. Okay. Um, so you don't calculate pulse pressure by palpating the pulse. You calculate it with the help of your BP apparatus. Okay. So that is what severe narrow pulse pressure is a feature of severe MS. You always look for the regularity. I told you atrial fibrillation is there. So you need not take an ECG every other time that you see a mitral stenosis patient. You auscultate. You look for his pulse. If it is irregular, then you can say it is he is going for atrial fibrillation. BP, you can have a narrow pulse pressure. JVP, I told you, V wave means TR, and A wave means pulmonary hypertension. In pulmonary hypertension, you can have yeah, a prominent A wave in JVP. This is mainly because of the right ventricular hypertrophy. Because of right ventricular hypertrophy, A stands for atrial systole. So, against a non-compliant or a hypertrophied ventricle, the right atrium has to contract vigorously, and this will translate into a prominent A wave. The pressure inside your right atrium is going to drastically increase because of your hypertrophied ventricle, non-compliant ventricle against which your right atrium has to pump blood. Okay, so on inspection, I told you can see a parasternal heave. On palpation, P2 may become palpable. The apex of the I mean, the apex will be tapping apex. Normal apex is also tapping. In mitral stenosis also you will have a tapping apex. But always remember the apex will not be the apex will not be displaced in case of a mitral stenosis. Okay, so S1 is always loud. Loud S1 is one. If you say S1 is loud in case of mitral stenosis, then it almost always means that you completely understood about mitral stenosis. Okay, why is the S1 loud in mitral stenosis? um, Remember, this is your LA pressure. I mean, this is your LA. And what happens? I told you basic pathology compensation in mitral stenosis. Your LA pressure is going to increase. When your LA pressure is going to increase, if these are the two valvelets of your mitral valve, where if this pressure is going to be decreased, the valves can approximate each other very easily, and this is going to produce a soft S1. When your valves are going to be like what? When your pressure is going to be very high, when the LA pressure is going to be high, then the valves have to approximate with greater pressure. The valves have to compensate for the increased LA pressure. So they come and snap at each other with a greater force. So that is why you get a loud S1. Basic, what? It's not even physics, it's not even mechanics, this is common sense, basic common sense. So when you are closing a door, if someone is going to trying to close a door against the wind that is trying to come push inside, that is going to come inside your window. So if that wind, if you're going to close the door of the window with more amount of pressure, then obviously the sound with which you're going to snap the window will be more. So that is very similar to what happens here. Okay. So you can have, as far as S2 is concerned, you can have a loud P2, and A2 and P2 can become widened. So I'm not going into A2 P2 and it's very complicated. So S2 will have a loud P2. You'll not hear if somebody says S3, S4 as far as mitral stenosis is concerned, you'll be failed because you will not get S3 and S4 when you're when your valves are affected. S3 and S4, if you say you are hearing in a patient, it almost always means the patient does not have a valvular pathology unless you don't have a atrioventricular valvular pathology. You hear it only in your aortic stenosis or your aortic regurgitation, and S3 mainly when your LV has failed, and S4 is when your LV has hypertrophied. Okay. You have a big definition for S3, S4, which we'll discuss in another class if time permits. And another important feature of mitral regurgitation is your opening snap. This term, though it is very new or it might sound complicated, it's very easy to understand. This is also a feature of increased LA pressure. Just like your S1, opening snap, if somebody asks you, why do you hear opening snap in mitral stenosis, you say it is because of your increased LA pressure. When the LA pressure is going to increase, there is going to be not only the valves close against each other. Okay, the valve leaflets do not only approximate with more pressure and produce a lot of noise because of the increased LA pressure. When they approximate with each other, the increased LA pressure is still persistent, which causes the dooming of the valves into your left ventricle. So this dooming down of the valves due to increased LA pressure produces what is called as the opening snap. Okay, that is what is called as the opening snap. They have approximated and they are dooming down into your left ventricle, all of which is due to your increased left atrial pressure. Okay, so this is what is called as the opening snap. And the opening snap, for the opening snap to be heard, your LV should be normal. Your LV should be normal. Okay, so when you have your LV failure, you cannot hear your opening snap. Again, when your valve is going to be calcified, you cannot hear your opening snap. And if your heart is not beating in sinus rhythm,